My name is Cole Walter, 32 years old, an entrepreneur living in New York, where the streets are always bustling like a heartbeat that never stops. My life is a series of busy days, meetings, signing contracts, and late nights sitting alone in my apartment looking out at the city lights. But amidst all of that, there's one person who's always been the center of my world, my mother, Susan. She's the strongest woman I know, but also someone who's sacrificed so much that I sometimes wonder if she even remembers how to live for herself. My mother raised me on her own after my father passed away when I was young. During those tough years, she worked tirelessly, from waitressing at a diner to sewing late into the night, just to give me a home and the chance to get an education. She never complained, but I saw the calluses on her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Now that I have a stable career, I want to give back to her a fraction of what she deserves. A comfortable life filled with joy, free from worries. The idea for a luxurious trip to Europe came to me one autumn evening as I sat in my office looking out the window. It was my mother's 55th birthday, and she called me from her small house in the suburbs of New Jersey. Her voice was as warm as ever, but I detected a hint of sadness, a subtle restraint she tried to hide. "Cole, are you busy?" "I just wanted to hear your voice for a bit," she said, and I felt my heart tighten. I knew she wasn't truly happy. Not completely, not since she remarried Richard 10 years ago. Richard. Just mentioning his name makes me grit my teeth. He's my stepfather, a tall man with a deep voice, always acting like he's the center of every conversation. Richard works in insurance, makes decent money, but to me, he's the embodiment of control and selfishness. He's never hit my mother. I swear if he ever dared, I wouldn't let him get away with it, but he has a way of making her feel small. Subtle jabs, decisions he makes for her, from what she wears to where she's allowed to go. My mother always tells me Richard just has a strong personality, but I see the weariness in her eyes whenever he's around. I decided to give my mother a special gift for her 10th wedding anniversary with Richard, a 3-week luxury trip to Europe through France, Italy, and Switzerland. I wanted her to live like a queen, staying in 5-star hotels, enjoying the finest meals and experiencing the vast world beyond the small house she's been confined to for so many years. But I also knew this trip couldn't exclude Richard because she wouldn't agree to go without him. I gritted my teeth and accepted it, telling myself that as long as she was happy, I could tolerate his presence. "Cole, are you crazy?" my mother shouted over the phone when I told her about the plan. Her voice was a mix of surprise and worry, as if she didn't believe she deserved something so extravagant. "This trip must cost a fortune. I don't need anything, Cole. Save your money for your future." "Mom, this isn't about need," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though I wanted to scream that she deserved nothing less than the best. "I want you to enjoy life. You've done so much for me. This time, let me take care of you, okay?" She was silent for a long time, and I could almost picture her sitting in the old armchair in the living room, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes welling up. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you, Cole. I don't know what to say." But Richard, as I expected, had a different reaction. When my mother told him about the trip, I heard his voice through the phone speaker, loud and full of smugness. "Well, the boy sure knows how to spend money." "Fine, Susan, we'll go. But I'll handle the detailed planning to make sure everything's perfect." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. He always has to control everything, even the gift I gave to my mother. On the day my mother and Richard boarded their flight, I drove them to JFK Airport. My mother hugged me tightly, her eyes sparkling with excitement mixed with worry. "Cole, are you sure you'll be okay? If anything urgent comes up, you have to call me right away," she said, as if I were still the 10-year-old boy who needed her protection. I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Mom, I'm fine. Just go and enjoy yourself. I want you to be happy." Richard stood nearby wearing an expensive blazer that I'd bet he bought with my mother's money. He patted my shoulder, flashing a smile I wanted to wipe off his face. "Thanks for the gift, Cole. I'll take good care of your mom." I nodded, but deep inside, a bad feeling began to take root. There was something in Richard's eyes, a smugness, a sense of control, that made me uneasy. As the plane took off, I stood by the airport window, feeling both relieved and anxious. I wanted my mother to have a perfect trip, but deep down I knew Richard wouldn't make things that easy. He wasn't the type to be grateful or appreciative, and I was afraid, deeply afraid, that my gift might unintentionally put my mother in a situation I couldn't control. The first few days, my mother sent me photos and messages full of excitement. One picture showed her standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, her smile radiant but slightly shy. Another was a video she recorded at a small cafe in Florence, where she tried her first espresso and burst out laughing because it was so bitter. "Cole, I never thought I'd see places like this," she texted. "Thank you, my dear son." Those messages warmed my heart, but I noticed she rarely mentioned Richard. When I asked, she only said briefly, "He's enjoying himself. Don't worry." But I couldn't help worrying. One evening, while I was checking emails in my office, my mother called. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if she didn't want anyone to overhear. "Cole, I'm fine, really, but Richard was a bit upset today. He didn't like this town very much." I asked where they were, and she said they had just arrived in a small town in Tuscany, a place I'd chosen because I thought she'd love its tranquility. "Upset how, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Well, it's just," he said, "I don't know how to behave in fancy places. I'm a bit clumsy, you know, and he got angry." She let out a small laugh, but I could hear the hurt in her voice. "It's okay, Cole, I'm used to it." I gripped the phone tightly, feeling like the blood in my veins was boiling. "Mom, you shouldn't have to be used to that. If he does anything out of line, you have to tell me right away, okay?" She agreed, but I knew she wouldn't tell me. She always tried to protect me, even when she was the one who needed protecting. I hung up, staring out my office window as the city lights flickered like a warning. The bad feeling inside me grew stronger, and I knew this trip wouldn't end the way I had hoped. The days that followed saw fewer and fewer messages from my mother. At first, I told myself she was probably busy enjoying the trip, swept up in the cobblestone streets of Italy or candlelit dinners overlooking the Tuscan hills. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. My mother wasn't the type to stop communicating, not ever. Every time I texted to check on her, she replied briefly, "I'm fine, Cole. Don't worry." But the tone in those words lacked the radiance of the early days. I started checking the transactions on the credit card I'd given her, not because I doubted her, but because I wanted to know where they were and what they were doing. The transactions showed they had moved from Florence to a small town called San Gimignano, a place I'd chosen for its quaint streets and peaceful atmosphere. But after that, there were no more transactions. That sent a chill down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the sofa in my New York apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to push away the worst images in my head. What had Richard done? Was he making my mother miserable? I blamed myself for letting her go with him, for thinking a luxurious trip could change the nature of someone like Richard. Toward dawn, I dozed off briefly, but my sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of my mother lost in unfamiliar streets. Then my phone rang. The screen showed my mother's name, but the clock read 4 a.m. in New York, around 10 a.m. in Italy. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse with worry. There was a long silence on the other end, only the sound of my mother's trembling breaths. Then she spoke, her voice small and broken. "Cole, I don't know what to do. Richard, he's gone." It felt like the floor had collapsed beneath me. "Gone? What do you mean? Where did he go?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but in my mind, every worst-case scenario was playing out. My mother recounted the story, her voice halting as if each word was a struggle to get out. Richard had complained about everything. The food was too expensive, the hotel wasn't luxurious enough, my mother walked too slowly. "He said I was embarrassing him," she whispered. "I just wanted to take a picture in front of a flower shop, But Richard got annoyed because he had to wait. He yelled at me right in the middle of the street. I gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might break. Yelled? He dared to yell at you? I felt rage surging up my throat but forced it down, not wanting to scare her further. What happened next, Mom? Tell me everything. She explained that the previous evening they had dinner at a small restaurant in the town's main square. My mother had tried to make peace, forcing smiles and conversation to appease Richard, but he grew increasingly irritable. When she accidentally spilled a glass of wine, Richard stood up abruptly, his face flushed, and berated her in front of all the diners. Can't you act like a civilized person, Susan? I'm sick of your clumsiness. My mother said. She just bowed her head, trying to hold back tears while everyone around stared. After dinner, they returned to the hotel in silence. My mother thought it would end there, like so many times before, when Richard would lose his temper and then act as if nothing had happened. But the next morning when she woke up, Richard was gone. He had taken all the cash, her phone from her purse, the credit card I'd given her, and left a scribbled note. I'm continuing the trip. You figure it out. Don't bother me. My mother stood frozen in the room, unable to believe what was happening. She called Richard, but he didn't answer. She tried walking to the square, hoping to find him, but all she found were unfamiliar streets and the curious glances of locals. But that wasn't the worst of it. My mother continued, her voice trembling more, saying that when she returned to the hotel to ask to stay longer, the receptionist shook their head. Madam, your stay has ended. We haven't received any new payment and the room is booked for other guests. She tried to explain, nearly begging that she had no money, that her husband had left her, but they only shrugged. A manager with a cold tone said in broken English, We're very sorry, but you must leave today. My mother stood in the hotel lobby, clutching her small suitcase, feeling like the world was crumbling around her. With nowhere to go, she dragged her suitcase onto the streets, the cobblestone alleys no longer picturesque but a terrifying maze. She didn't speak Italian, had no money, only a few coins in her coat pocket. She recounted sitting on a bench in the square watching people pass by, couples laughing, families taking photos, and feeling like a ghost. I was scared, Cole, she whispered over the phone. I was scared I'd never get out. I felt so horribly alone. She said she wandered for hours trying to find a place to rest, but the air grew cold and she didn't know where to go. A few passers-by glanced at her, but no one stopped. She cried quietly in an empty alley, thinking perhaps this was the price for the years she'd let Richard control her life. Finally, she found a small cafe where a server named Elena noticed her panic. Elena gave her a free cappuccino, let her sit in a corner of the cafe, and lent her a phone to call me. She was so kind, Cole, my mother said, her voice choking. I don't know what I would have done without her. I felt the blood rush to my head. Richard hadn't just abandoned my mother, he had deliberately left her alone, penniless, without a way to cope in a foreign country. He knew she didn't speak the language, knew she couldn't manage on her own, and he did it anyway, as if she were worth nothing. This wasn't just selfishness, it was cruelty. I wanted to fly to Italy right then, grab him by the collar and make him pay. But first I needed to make sure my mother was safe. Mom, listen to me, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm despite the storm raging inside. Stay right there in that cafe. I'm coming to you. Don't go anywhere, okay? She agreed, her voice faint. I asked her to pass the phone to Elena. In a gentle but enthusiastic Italian accent, Elena promised to take my mother to her home temporarily, since the hotel had turned her away. I'll take care of her, don't worry, Elena said. I thanked her, feeling a small spark of hope in the midst of this nightmare. After hanging up, I immediately booked the earliest flight to Florence, not caring about the cost or having to cancel every meeting that week. All I could think about was my mother, alone, wandering cold streets, gripped by fear and loneliness. While waiting for the flight, I checked the credit card transactions again. A new charge had appeared from a luxurious restaurant in Rome, hundreds of kilometers from San Gimignano. Richard hadn't just abandoned my mother, he was continuing the trip, spending my money as if nothing had happened. I clenched my teeth, feeling the urge to smash something, but I told myself to stay calm. My mother needed me, and I wouldn't let anger distract me. On the plane, I couldn't sleep. I stared out the window at clouds drifting under the moonlight, thinking of my mother. She had sacrificed her entire life for me, always putting me above everything else. Now she was abandoned, treated as worthless by the man she called her husband. I made a silent vow. I would pull her out of this nightmare, and I would make Richard pay. When the plane landed in Florence, it was already dusk. I rented a car and drove straight to San Gimignano, my heart heavy. I didn't know what state I'd find my mother in, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let her suffer a single moment longer. Richard had crossed every line, and I would make him regret ever hurting the most important woman in my life. The car sped through the winding roads of Tuscany, its headlights slicing through the night. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding as if it might burst from my chest. San Gimignano was only a few kilometers away, but every passing second felt like a century. The image of my mother wandering cold streets, dragging her small suitcase with eyes full of fear, haunted me. I couldn't forgive myself for letting her fall into this situation, and I could never forgive Richard, the man who turned my gift into a nightmare. When I reached the town, the cobblestone alleys glimmered faintly under golden streetlights. San Gimignano was beautiful, like a painting, but now it only evoked despair in me. I called Elena, the kind server who had helped my mother. "I'm at the main square," I said, my voice urgent. "Where's my mom?" "She's at my house," Elena replied, her tone warm but tinged with worry. "She's okay, but you should come right away. She needs you." Elena sent me the address, a small house on the outskirts of town. I drove through narrow roads, my heart heavy. I didn't know what state I'd find my mother in, but I braced myself for the worst. When I knocked, Elena opened the door, offering a gentle smile but with eyes full of concern. "She's in there," she said, pointing to a small room. I stepped inside, and in that moment, everything seemed to freeze. My mother sat in an old armchair, her hands clasped tightly, her silver hair disheveled. She wore the green sweater I'd given her last year, but it was crumpled, as if she'd endured days of hardship in it. Her eyes, usually bright with love for me, were now dulled by exhaustion and pain. "Mom," I called, my voice catching. She looked up, and for a split second her eyes lit up as if she'd found light in the darkness. She stood, stumbling slightly, and I rushed to her, wrapping her in a tight embrace. She broke into sobs, her cries shattering the silence, and I felt my own tears fall. "Cole, you're here," she whispered, her hands clutching me as if afraid I'd disappear. I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm here, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "I won't leave you alone again. Never." We stood there, holding each other in Elena's small room in a foreign town, and I felt the deep love between us, the love that had carried us through years of hardship. Elena quietly brought a tray of tea, then left us alone. I sat beside my mother, holding her hand, and listened as she spoke. She told me about the hours wandering the streets, the bone-chilling cold as night fell, the fear that she'd never find a way out. "I thought of you," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought if I gave up, who would be there for you? I couldn't leave you alone, Cole." I squeezed her hand, feeling both pain and pride. My mother was stronger than she realized, even if she didn't see it. "You're never alone," I said. "I'm always here, Mom. Always." I stayed with her that night in Elena's small room. My mother fell asleep in the armchair, and I sat beside her watching. She looked so fragile, but I knew inside her was a strength even she hadn't recognized. I took out my phone and texted an Italian lawyer I knew through work. I needed someone to help me track Richard, and I needed to ensure my mother was legally protected. Richard had taken my credit card and abandoned my mother in a dangerous situation. This wasn't just personal. It was criminal. The next morning, I took my mother to a new hotel in Florence, a cozy place I'd booked over the phone. She protested, saying she didn't want me to spend more money, but I wouldn't listen. "Mom, this is what I want to do," I said. You deserve to be treated like a queen, not the way Richard treated you." At the hotel, my mother began to regain a bit of her spark. The staff treated her kindly. One receptionist even gave her a small bouquet of flowers, saying she reminded her of her own mother. My mother smiled, the first smile I'd seen since arriving in Italy, and I felt a glimmer of hope. But I knew her journey wasn't over. She needed time to heal, and I needed to act to ensure Richard could never hurt her again. I contacted the lawyer, a middle-aged man named Marco, who had an office in Florence. Marco listened to the story, his brows furrowing as I described Richard's actions. "This is a serious case," he said. "Abandoning someone without means of survival could be considered endangerment. We can pursue legal action, and his unauthorized use of your credit card is another issue." Marco agreed to help me track Richard through the card transactions and work with local police to gather evidence. In the meantime, I stayed by my mother's side, trying to help her rediscover joy. I took her for a walk in Florence to a small cafe by the Arno River. She sat there, watching the river sparkle in the sunlight, and said, "Cole, I never thought I'd see places like this. I've lived too long in Richard's shadow." Her words broke my heart, but also strengthened my resolve. I wanted her not just to survive this nightmare, but to rediscover herself. That night, Marco called. "Cole, I have news," he said. "Richard is in Zurich. He's spent a large amount at a 5-star hotel and a high-end restaurant. We also found a plane ticket. He's planning to fly to Paris tomorrow." "Thank you, Marco," I said. "I'll fly to Zurich. Can you prepare the paperwork so I can confront him?" Marco agreed, and I felt a surge of energy. This wasn't just about seeking justice for my mother. It was about showing Richard he couldn't trample over others without consequences. I turned to my mother, who was sitting on the hotel room sofa, reading a travel book about Italy. "Mom, I have to go to Zurich," I said. "I'm going to find Richard and make him pay. You'll stay here, okay? I'll be back soon." She looked at me, her eyes a mix of worry and resolve. "Cole, be careful," she said. "I don't want to lose you." I knelt down, taking her hands. "You won't lose me, I promise, but I can't let him get away with this." Before leaving the hotel, I asked the staff to ensure my mother was well cared for and to keep me updated on her regularly. After making sure everything was arranged for my mother, I left the hotel and boarded a flight to Zurich, my heart burning with determination. Richard had gone too far, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. The plane landed in Zurich as dusk settled, the city lights twinkling like jewels across the lake. But I had no mind for sightseeing. My sole focus was one goal: find Richard and make him face the consequences of what he'd done. I gripped my phone tightly, checking the message from Marco, the lawyer in Florence. He'd sent the address of the 5-star hotel where Richard was staying, a place so luxurious that the thought of him using my money to live there made my blood boil. Marco also sent a file containing copies of the credit card transactions and a preliminary police report from San Gimignano about my mother's abandonment. These documents were my weapons, and I would use them to shatter Richard's smugness. I hailed a taxi from the airport, my heart pounding as the car glided through Zurich's pristine streets. I didn't know exactly what I'd say when I confronted Richard, but one thing was certain: I wouldn't let him escape. Not after what he'd done to my mother, leaving her alone, penniless, without shelter, while he lived extravagantly like some aristocrat. I clutched the documents in my hand, feeling as if they were burning. The hotel stood in the city center, a magnificent building with a glass facade and crystal chandeliers in the lobby. I walked in, forcing myself to appear calm despite the storm raging inside. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, asked how she could help. "I need to see a guest, Richard Harper," I said, my voice firm. "He's staying here." She checked her computer, then frowned. "Sir, Mr. Harper is currently at the hotel's restaurant. Would you like me to call him out to meet you?" I shook my head. "No, I'll go in myself." I didn't want to give Richard time to prepare, didn't want him to have a chance to slip away. I wanted to see his face when I exposed everything. The restaurant was on the top floor overlooking Lake Zurich, As I entered, soft piano music filled the air, mingling with the laughter and chatter of wealthy patrons. I scanned the room, and then I saw him. Richard, seated at a table near the window, dressed in an expensive suit, laughing with a group of strangers, probably new travel acquaintances. The table was adorned with sparkling wine glasses and plates of food that looked more expensive than a month's salary for some. He appeared to be enjoying life, without a care, without a shred of remorse. I approached, each step like a hammer, striking the anger within me. Richard looked up as I neared, and for a moment I saw surprise flicker in his eyes, quickly replaced by his familiar smug smile. "Cole," he boomed as if greeting an old friend, "what are you doing here? Sit down, let me get you a glass of wine." I didn't sit. I stood there, locking eyes with him, feeling the urge to wipe that smile off his face. "I'm not here for wine, Richard," I said, my voice ice cold. "I'm here to talk about my mother. About how you abandoned her in San Gimignano with no money, no place to go, while you spend my money living like a king here." The table fell silent. Richard's companions glanced at me, then at him, their eyes filled with curiosity and unease. Richard let out a dry laugh, but I noticed sweat beading on his forehead. "Cole, you've got it all wrong," he said, his voice still clinging to confidence. "Susan and I just had a little argument. She wanted to stay in that town and I wanted to continue the trip. It's no big deal." "No big deal?" I snapped, slamming the documents onto the table. The papers fanned out, revealing copies of the credit card transactions and the police report. "You took all her money, took my credit card, and left her alone in a foreign town, not speaking the language, with no place to stay. The hotel kicked her out and she wandered the streets, terrified, alone. You call that no big deal?" My voice carried, drawing the attention of nearby tables. Whispers began to spread, and I saw Richard's face pale. He tried to laugh, but it came out distorted. "Cole, calm down," he said. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Susan's fine, isn't she? She always knows how to manage." "Fine," I shouted, unable to hold back any longer. My mother was crying in a cold alley, thinking she'd never escape. My mother, who sacrificed her entire life for me, was treated like garbage by you. And you dare sit here dining in luxury while she didn't even have a place to sleep? A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth, eyes wide. A man muttered something to his companion, shaking his head. Richard glanced around, clearly realizing he was losing face. "Cole, that's enough," he barked, standing up. "This isn't the place for family disputes." "No, this is the perfect place," I said, stepping closer. "Because you love showing off, love being the center of attention. So let me tell everyone who you really are. A selfish, cruel man who lived off my generosity only to betray my mother. Did you think you'd get away with it?" I pulled out my phone, opening an email from Marco. "The police are reviewing your actions as a case of endangerment," I said. "And using my credit card without permission? That's theft. I've hired a lawyer and I'll make sure you pay for every cent you spent, every second my mother suffered." Richard's face drained of color, his hands trembling. You can't do this," he stammered. "We're family, Cole. I'm your stepfather." "Family?" I scoffed. "You don't deserve to be called family. You're a coward, and as of now, I'm cutting off all financial support. This trip, you're paying for it yourself, and if you don't apologize to my mother, I'll see you in court." Richard's companions began to stand, murmuring apologies and leaving. One middle-aged man shot Richard a look of disgust before walking out. Richard stood alone in the crowded room, his smugness gone. "Cole, listen to me," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I'll apologize to Susan. I didn't think things would go this far." "Didn't think?" I snapped. "You deliberately left my mother to panic, to beg, but my mother is stronger than you realize, and so am I." I turned my back, unwilling to hear another word from him. "You have 24 hours to contact my mother and apologize. If not, you'll hear from my lawyer." As I left the restaurant, the murmurs of the diners followed me. I knew Richard would never regain his dignity in front of those people. He'd dug his own grave, and I'd just pushed him in. On the way back to my hotel in Zurich, I called my mother. "Mom, I just saw Richard. I said. "He's going to apologize, but you don't have to forgive him. You get to decide your own life." She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard. "Cole, I don't want his apology. I want freedom." I smiled, feeling like she was starting to reclaim herself. "I'm with you, Mom," I said. "Whatever you want, I'll be by your side." That night, I lay in the hotel bed thinking of my mother. Richard might apologize, but he'd lost everything: respect, dignity, and my mother. And my mother, though she'd endured a nightmare, was beginning a new journey. I would stand behind her just as she had always stood behind me. The next morning, I called my mother again. She told me she had decided to stay in Italy for a few more months. Not because she didn't want to return to New York, but because she wanted to rediscover herself, something she had lost in the years spent living in Richard's shadow. I agreed immediately. That same day, I took an early flight back to New York. Upon returning, I rented an Airbnb in Italy for my mother for 6 months. I also enrolled her in a cooking class in Florence where she would learn to make fresh pasta, and I was certain she'd have moments of laughter with flour all over her hands. Every evening I called my mother, listening to her talk about her new experiences, new dishes, and the kind Italian friends she was making. I smiled, proud that she hadn't just survived the nightmare but had found light within herself. She told me Richard had called her once, his voice trembling as he apologized, but she simply said, "I don't need your apology, Richard. I need freedom." Looking back, I realized this trip was more than just a vacation. It helped my mother become stronger, braver, and free herself from the toxic husband she had lived with for the past 10 years. My mother, Susan, is now a flame that will never go out. And I, Cole, will always be the one standing behind her, just as she has always stood behind me. Because in family we find strength, and in ourselves we find hope.